In the world of Fear and Hunger, the old gods are probably the most mysterious and confusing part of the story. On the surface, they might seem straightforward, their concepts given form, seemingly acting without bias or malice, but rather as a kind of universal force. However, upon further research, they're actually quite complex characters in their own right, with thoughts, feelings, and motivations. Some of them like humanity, others don't. Some want to abandon the world and take no part in it. Others are highly invested in it. Sylvan has a deep affection for humanity, but was also the first to abandon it. Sylvan is a goddess of love and fertility, yet the bunny masks treat sex, a deeply intimate and emotional experience for most people, as casually as breathing. It's clear that the old gods aren't just complex, but contradictory. Because of this, there's deep theological division in the ranks of the Dark Priests, and one of their biggest disagreements is about whether or not it's possible for an old god to die. We know from the Depth God in Fear and Hunger that when an old god dies, they don't merely cease. They continue to linger, and their power is up for grabs, with the little girl able to mantle the old god's power and become an ascended one. In theory, this should mean that the Depth God ceases to be, but we still see remnants of its power even to this day, with the insects and vermin of the world still seemingly falling under its domain and influence, when rightfully they should be under the sphere of the god of Fear and Hunger. Even the dungeon, 400 years after the death of the god, still feels its influence, despite it purportedly being dead for centuries. When Osar pays the place a visit, he encounters the grotesque guards, and even the crow mauler, still active. Indeed, in Fear and Hunger itself we also find the corpse of Ulmer, an ascended god. He's clearly cadaverific, yet we can access his power in-game, and he's arguably one of the strongest beings in existence. With all this in mind, it's strange then that Enki and Karian of all people would make the extraordinary claim that a god is dead. In Fear and Hunger Termina, we're introduced by Enki's skin Bibles to a previously unknown old god, Vinushka. Vinushka is the direct offspring of Grogoroth and Sylvan, destruction and creation, making it the god of nature, the cycle of destruction and creation epitomized. According to the new gods, there is no fixed depiction of Vinushka, as his appearance changes from culture to culture depending on what that culture's surrounding biomes are. While we can't meet the old god in Termina, its influence can be found all over the Maiden Forest at Preheville. The name Maiden Woods comes from a local practice wherein virgins would be sacrificed to the deep woods, and upon entering it's pretty clear that they have a creepy ethereal atmosphere. Osar and Marco will notice that your party is being watched from the trees, should they be with you. After the Termina festival starts, the woods are still alive with people. We can find a group of cultists in a hidden part of the wood, who will flee from us immediately. Abella will say she thinks she can hear drums echoing around us, making her question her own sanity. On some nights, we can even find a strange woman singing a disturbed melody to an audience of trees. While exploring the deep woods, we'll suddenly be hit with a poison dart, and set upon by an owl cultist. The owl masks seem to be to Vinushka what the bunny and wolf masks are to Sylvan and Grogoroth. Its camouflage and defensiveness of the forest indicates this as well. In combat, the owl cultist can summon an owl sprite. The sprite is the true power of the cultist, able to peck off a man's head in one go, and seems to be the purest link to Vinushka that the cult have. We can try to talk with the owl cultists. The owl cultist will hesitate, allowing us to finish it, though the owl mask will never talk back. Upon examination, the mask seems to have fused to the owl cultist's face, possibly due to being moon-scorched, but maybe some other supernatural means are at play here. After all, the other cultists we find in the forest don't seem to be suffering from the effects of moon-scorching, or at least their afflictions aren't as brutal as those suffered by the people we find in the Old Town, or Preheville City proper. The faceless dogs may well also be a creation of Vinushka. We find them both in the woods and on the outskirts of the Maiden Forest. The faceless are named as such because of their lack of heads. Instead, they just have a kind of maw, with muscles to simulate having a normal mouth. Upon killing them, Dan can analyze the creature and notes that its appearance is similar to a wolf, and he thinks the appearance change is due to some kind of mutation, but upon examination the change seems to be far too symmetrical to be anything other than purposeful. When you look at other moon-scorched creatures and people, their appearance afterwards is often, well, let's just say not very symmetrical. Their arms, eyes, or mental states will be all over the place. The skin of the moon-scorched fecal hounds are also covered in boils and bruisings, like every other moon-scorched creature around, whereas the headless retain perfect skin, as well as all their fur, and their location so close to the forest also indicates their allegiance to Vinushka, possibly acting as a kind of first line of defense, or vanguard. Their vomit has a poisonous effect. Perhaps they're there to weaken any interlopers to be picked off later by the far superior owl cultists. Finally, we have the Iku Terso. If we talk to Marina in the Maiden Woods, she'll tell us that she's never really been here, and will reference a story she was told as a child about the Elkman, a boogeyman-like creature who kidnaps and eats children who stray too far away from home. The Iku Terso is a colossal creature, and immediately visually looks like something a nature god would create. Its design is a fusion of an animal, with antlers and distinct biological features such as eyes and a mouth. It's also humanoid, having human-like arms and hands, although upon inspection the antlers are wooden, looking more like tree branches, and bits of mud and moss seem to comprise the creature's body. In fact, it looks as though the entire creature may be made from the earth. According to the new gods, the Iku Terso will only awaken upon the return of Vinushka. However, it will make an exception if nature is threatened in some way, though the one we meet is quite passive and seems more annoyed by the contestants than anything else. Awakened from my slumber. Is it time yet? It is time? What nuisance. I wait for Vinushka. Do not wake me again, worm. Honestly, he's a bit of a mood. We can't fight him, and after talking to us, he pretty much immediately goes back to sleep. This interaction is interesting. At the very least, it confirms that Vinushka is indeed gone, and also that whatever is happening with the Kaisar, Rare, and Percule, the woods of Prehiville aren't in enough danger for the Iki Terso to awaken fully and take direct action, though the fact that the one we meet is so far on the outskirts of the deep woods, especially its proximity to a certain bunker, suggests that it might be prepared to act should events go in a certain way. Vinushka's power and influence doesn't just end at the borders of the forest though. If you read the Vinushka Skin Bible, you'll learn how to carve the mark of the god. If the mark of Vinushka is drawn into a ritual circle, a colossal tree will sprout, creating new routes or giving the player access to unique loot. In the old town in Prehiville, we can see what appears to be the remnants of Vinushka trees, meaning his worship isn't strictly isolated to weirdos in the woods. Vinushka is noticeably absent from the game. In the first game, we hear about Sylvan, Grogroth, and the Depth God, and encounter all three, so Vinushka being nowhere to be seen is odd. And it's speculated by Enki the reason for this is that the god is dead. The Vinushka Skin Bible out in public consumption was written by Enki and Karian, but has since been edited with few traces remaining of Enki's original work. According to the in-game item descriptions, this editing was done by the Vatican, but it may be that there's another culprit at large. But we'll get into that. There's no explicit reason for why such an edit would even need to take place, but as we explore what's been changed or left out, maybe we'll figure it out. The first Skin Bible is actually fairly basic, giving a brief overview of Vinushka. He's a nature god, child of Grogroth and Sylvan, and that's about it. But Enki's unedited version contains a lot more information, and spills a lot more of the tea. According to it, Vinushka's true name is Nanush, but it was changed to Vinushka because the word Vinushka apparently translates to guilt, though in what language we're not really sure. But whose guilt exactly? According to Enki, it's mankind's guilt. Ankarian states, the ancient tribes of men used to live in a symbiosis with nature, with its cycles of destruction and creation. But people grew greedy and hostile towards the land. They settled and ravaged nature to give room for their own civilizations. And as humanity grew greedy and hostile, so did Vinushka. A long war was waged to determine who was to become the master and who the slave. To everyone's surprise, or at least to my surprise, this resulted in the demise of Vinushka. For all intents and purposes, nature is dead, Vinushka died by the hands of men. It's an accepted matter of fact that the old gods have abandoned humanity. It was said that Sylvan was the first, leading me to wonder if the death of Vinushka might have been the motivation for this. When Ulmer came to power, the old gods were all but gone, but still the Ascended One venerated them and tried to restore their rule to the world, until he died in the 5th century. We know the girl ascended at the death of the Depth God, which makes me speculate whether Ulmer had a similar relationship to Vinushka, but really who's to say? Enki does present an interesting idea in his Skin Bible, that mankind and nature are separate and distinct entities, and this idea actually comes directly from the Abrahamic faiths. In pretty much all of the Abrahamic faiths, mankind is given dominion over nature and beasts, although in the world of Fear and Hunger, it actually seems that the old gods may have intended both to be equal to one another, with Sylvan in particular viewing mankind and nature as her children. Mayhaps Enki's tale on Vinushka then is a kind of play on the story of Cain and Abel, with one brother being murdered and the other cursed for all eternity. But I'll be the first to admit that's a lot of assumption on my end. But that's all assuming, of course, that Enki is even right. At the centre of Vinushka's lore is an important question that all other information must revolve around. Is Vinushka really dead? And if he is, why do we still find all manner of supernatural phenomena in the forests of Preheville that directly relate to him? When a whale dies in the ocean, its rotting carcass becomes an ecosystem and food supply for those animals that dwell on the ocean floor, sustaining them for decades in some cases. This is called a whale fall. I do wonder if a dead old god would have a similar effect, but in terms of raw cosmic power, rather than directly as food, allowing magic users to have moments of unparalleled strength. In the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, the Depth God was asleep under the foundations, and its lingering influence left after effects on the place, just by being in proximity. Vinushka's servants are similarly powerful to the Depth Gods, and I have to wonder if what we saw in Fear and Hunger is the same as what we're seeing in the Deep Woods. This is of course if Vinushka really is dead, because that's an idea that some people do find disagreeable. As I said earlier, the in-game item description for Vinushka's Skin Bible states that the Vatican changed Enki's work and repackaged it for public consumption, although personally I find this little factoid to be somewhat disingenuous. The Vatican Church is an institution, and institutions are made up of people, which brings us to Father Donovan. The unedited copy of Vinushka's Skin Bible can be found in his home. It's the only one in the game. We know from my previous video that Donovan has animosity towards Enki, and specifically takes umbrage with the idea that an old god can die. Donovan is also a fairly prominent scholar and academic in the world of the Dark Priests, with Marina, a local to Preheville, telling us that some people believe Donovan is a vampire, speculating that he's possibly hundreds of years old. But surely these stories are just the result of a child's overactive imagination. Surely the Dark Priest who oversees the local orphanage wouldn't have any bizarre supernatural skeletons in his closet. Regardless of all that, Donovan is a scholar, and it's unlikely his work would have been taken seriously if it were published outside of the Vatican. So it seems that his views align with the higher powers of the Church, while Enki argues that humanity and nature are separate and at odds, because of the former's greed, or at least were at odds until one side won, presenting a semi-Abrahamic interpretation of humanity's relationship to nature. The Skin Bible edited by Donovan actually presents a different thesis altogether. The similarities between nature and mankind are fitting, as both grow up sucking the many bosoms of Sylvan. Both were born from the same loins. Vinushka and the representation of humanity, Ulmer, the Ascended One, are considered equal. Neither of the two stands taller. What is Vinushka's is for men to reap, just as nature reaps are old and weary. That final line makes it clear that Donovan not only believes Vinushka is still alive, but also that humanity and nature actually exist in a kind of mutual symbiotic relationship, with both parties ultimately feeding off one another. We harvest nature's rewards, and nature harvests our dead. Donovan's edit is similar to the studies of the old gods in the first game, that outlined what the god was and how they exerted their influence. Enki's Skin Bibles, meanwhile, extrapolate on the gods, attempting to break down and understand their true motives and characters, outside of the fables. Regardless of the theological debate though, It's clear that Vinushka is gone, and its servants, like the clay figures of Orma, wait impotently for the god's return, in a state of stagnancy until humanity inevitably surpasses them.